Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda, and I have another exciting episode of the news for you. 4 articles in this edition. The first one is off of freethoughtproject.com, and it says, Nato auditor investigating terrorism funding found dead. Family disputes it was suicide. This is out of Belgium. Yves Chandlington, NATO Auditor General, was found dead by gunshot to the head in the Belgian city of Annenen last Friday. Authorities are calling the death a suicide, but Chandlington's family is reportedly vehemently disputing that assessment. Although information remains scarce, there are troubling details suggesting Chandlington indeed might not have taken his own life. For one thing, the NATO auditor, who was apparently tasked with counteraction against terrorism financing issues, according to news.am, was found over 62 miles from Linz, the city where he lived, and nearly 87 miles from his place of work in Luxembourg. Chandlington also owned 3 registered firearms, but an unregistered weapon was discovered near his body. Further, Belgian press reports Chandlington had mentioned to his entourage he thought he had been followed and had received strange calls. Sudinfo.be reports the man's family had a number of unanswered questions surrounding the strange death, asking, did Yves Chandlington have any enemies? Was he threatened in NATO? Was it an odious crime made up in suicide, or did the man go through a troubled period? Belgian media also reports in the days before his suspicious death, Chandlington felt threatened, and that the duties of his job would have required him to deal with money laundering and issues related to terrorism, a profile likely to expose Chandlington to danger. Indeed, several NATO allies and glaringly NATO members nation have been exposed for directly funding terrorist groups, most notoriously the self-titled Islamic State. Incidentally, Russian ambassador to Turkey Andrei Karlov was assassinated this week in Ankara while giving a speech to a small group gathered in an art gallery. Though the killer was shot dead by police shortly afterward, questions still surround the incident. Mevlet Mert Altina, I'll try to pronounce that right, Altintas, okay, Mevlet Mert Altintas, the man who murdered Karlov, had been a Turkish police officer until a recent purge by President of those sympathetic to political opposition believed by him to be behind a coup attempt this year. Altintas reportedly began shouting about revenge for Aleppo, the recently liberated Syrian city where Syrian government forces backed by Russia battled to expel all terrorist groups. Terrorist groups are backed by the U.S. and Turkey, and the United States even armed one of the largest faction of the so-called moderate rebels as part of its attempt to depose Syrian President Assad. As for the Islamic State, Turkey has been exposed for allowing the caliphate to transport stolen oil and other supplies into Syria, a fact ultimately admitted true by the U.S., and an issue that has brought condemnation and rancor in the NATO ranks. Richard Black explained in an interview in January, as reported by RT, and here's his quote. It says, virtually all arms, ammunition, equipment, supplies, jihadist medical support, all of it comes from Turkey. Right now, ISIS sends 44,000 barrels of oil per day, stolen barrels, most of it from Syria, into Turkey, said Black. The State Department has publicly said that there is only a trickle of oil that gets into Turkey, but I have personally spoken to Kurdish activists who observed hundreds of ISIS oil tankers carrying stolen Syrian oil into Turkey on a daily basis, unquote. In fact, Black called the Islamic State a tool of the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and NATO earlier this month, saying, as RT reported, quote, I think ISIS is often used as a tool between Turkey and the United States, and as long as they are useful to one of those parties, they are protected, and when they are not useful, they are not protected, Black said, arguing that ISIS served as a tool of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United States and NATO forces from the very beginning of the conflict in Syria. In addition to Karlov and now Chandlenden, a third suspicious death also occurred within the span of 1 week. Peter Poshnikov, 56, was found with a bullet hole in his head after an unknown assailant fired at least 2 rounds at the senior civil servant. Russian media reported this week Polishkov, who had been chief advisor to the Latin America department at the Russian ministry, was found in his Moscow home, however, only hours after the assassination of Karlov. Considering how dangerous dealing with the morass of shady political figures, terrorists, and ideologies would be for Chandlenden, there are certainly other possibilities than suicide which might better explain what happened. This is a developing story and will be updated with additional information if and when it becomes available. The article has been updated to reflect Chandlenden was found last Friday, not Thursday. So there you have that article. The next one that I have for you is off of thenewamerican.com, and it says Obama's administration increases refugee resettlement during final months. The United States has admitted 23,428 aliens as refugees during the first 11 weeks of fiscal year 2017, October 1st through December 17th, according to Refugee Processing Center, or the RPC, which is operated by the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, called the PRM. It's all alphabet soup, gang. It says the RPC's computers track the movement of refugees from various countries around the world to the United States for resettlement under the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, or the USRAP. If the rate of refugee settlements thus far in fiscal year 2017 holds, the United States will resettle approximately 110,580 for the fiscal year. This number would exceed President Obama's goal of admitting 110,000. In an 82-page report to Congress obtained by Politico in September, the Obama administration said it will try to admit a significantly higher number of refugees from Syria during the next fiscal year than the 10,000 goal it set for the fiscal year that ended on September the 30th. The administration exceeded the 10,000 figure a month ahead of schedule. The World Net Daily reported on December the 20th that its new news editor, Leo Hohmann, sees the ramped up numbers as part of a concerted effort by the Obama administration to admit as many refugees as possible before Donald Trump becomes president. Get them here before Trump takes office on January the 20th, because you don't know exactly what Trump will do with regard to this controversial program, Hohmann said, summarizing the Obama administration's attitude. The left is in panic mode because this program has run on autopilot for 35 years, and now, for the first time, we have a president who has expressed an interest in taking a hard, critical look at how it is run and the effects it's had on our cities, states, and country. Hohmann pointed to a recent column by Daniel Horowitz, senior editor at Conservative Review, noting that Trump can block roughly 80,000 of the refugees who are scheduled to be admitted after he takes office, Horowitz wrote. To begin with, 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act gives the president unilateral authority at will to shut down any form of immigration under any circumstance. In particular, 207 delegated to the president full authority to set the number of refugees to be admitted in a given year. Thus, Trump can easily shut down refugee resettlement through executive action on day one of his administration. In our article posted on September the 29th, one day before fiscal year 2016 ended, we cited a statement made the previous day by Simon Henshaw, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, during a hearing of the Senate Subcommittee on Immigration and the National Interest convened by Committee Chairman Jeff Sessions, Republican of Alabama, President-elect Trump's pick to be our next Attorney General. During his testimony, Henshaw admitted that during the vetting process for refugees, U.S. immigration officials make no effort to learn if they harbor extremist views. During the hearing, Sessions questioned Henshaw about the procedures for screening refugee applicants, asking, "Do you make any inquiry about practices that we reject in the United States, like female genital mutilation? Do you believe in that when you come to the United States? Will you comply with the laws of the United States on that kind of question?" Sessions then pursued his line of questioning by citing a Justice Department report indicating that the United States last year experienced 27 honor killings, a practice that is widely accepted in some Muslim-dominated countries that practice Sharia law. Henshaw told Sessions, "Senator, I see no evidence to show that refugee communities are bringing these values into the United States. I see that they're becoming good American citizens, members of the military, members of our police, people that have U.S. American values." Sessions then noted that the perpetrators of Muslim honor killings come from the same cultural backgrounds as refugees, and also observed that 40 refugees have been charged with terrorism-related crimes in the United States. "So you're not perfect in your admission, I have to admit," Sessions said. Considering that Trump relied on Sessions as one of his key advisors during the presidential campaign, and that the Alabama senator is set to become our next attorney general, it's safe to assume that the incoming president will share Sessions' concerns that the Obama administration, in its rush to admit as many Syrian and other Middle Eastern refugees as possible, was extremely lax in its vetting process. Therefore, it should come as no surprise if Trump uses his authority, as Daniel Horowitz suggested, to block many of the 80,000 refugees that Obama has scheduled to be fast-tracked through the admissions process. And the next article I have for you is off of BizPac Review. It says, "Interrogator says terrorist will use political correctness to America's demise, plan to outbreed non-Muslims." Psychologist and former CIA contractor Dr. James Mitchell, who interrogated 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, went on Fox News, the Kelly File, Wednesday to talk about the recent spate of terror attacks around the world and what he considers one of the leading causes, political correctness. Referring to Berlin truck attack leading suspect Anis Amri, Mitchell said it was political correctness and that their unwillingness to get this person out of the country who had no business being there because he didn't have the right paperwork to prove who he was. Mitchell has strong reasons to believe as he does, having firsthand knowledge of how the terrorist mind works. In fact, he had Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or KSM, discuss so-called lone wolf style attacks in wake of the DC sniper attacks in 2002. For him, what surprised him was how much paralysis it caused, given how few deaths were involved. Few from his perspective, Mitchell said of KSM. And what he said to me was our civil liberties and our openness and our willingness to be responsive to other people's cultures were weaknesses and flaws that his God, Allah, had to put into the American culture so that we would be defeated. Muhammad, like many other Islamic extremists, wants to win the long battle to take over the world with Sharia law, and the easiest way to do this is through immigration and by outbreeding non-Muslims. He said that like-minded jihad brothers would immigrate to Western democracies and to the United States. They would wrap themselves in our civil liberties for protection. Mitchell told host Sandra Smith they would support themselves in our welfare systems while they spread their jihadi message, and then, when the time was right, they would rise up and attack. Here's the way political correctness works for a guy like KSM. It allows them to ratchet up the focus on Sharia law without us pushing back on it. And we end up inadvertently imposing on ourselves the blaspheme laws of Sharia because we cut back on the things that they find offensive. We change the way we dress. We don't have Christmas parties anymore. We don't say Merry Christmas to each other on the street. Women have to have headgear. They set up these enclaves, and out of these enclaves, they try to impose Sharia law on those people who come into them. We simply have to not let that happen. Like President-elect Donald Trump, Mitchell believes the U.S. should slow down immigration from countries that promote terrorism. I hope there's going to be change because here's the way political correctness works for a guy like Muhammad. It allows them to operate in our midst without being challenged. And there's a video that you can view, has a link there at the bottom of that one, so you can click on it if you want to hear more on that. And the final article in this episode is off of truthandaction.org, and it says, cafe owner wins appeal after neighborhood claimed smell of bacon offends Muslims. I thought this was a good article to follow the last one with. It says, after a 6-month legal battle between a pair of cafe owners and their Muslim neighbor, Graham Webb Lee has been settled in the couple's favor. The complaint, the cafe produced a bacon smell that is offensive to Mr. Webb Lee. Graham Webb Lee complained that the cafe's extractor fan, which forces out the cooking bacon smell from the cafe, was bothering him and his family and was bothering his Muslim friends so much that they felt physically sick. After inspectors visited the cafe and declared everything was fine, Webb Lee continued to complain until it was discovered that the cafe owners had never applied for planning permission to install the new extractor fan. After the decision of the court, Webb Lee remains frustrated, saying that his was concerned for his family and that his house stinks of vile cooking smells. And page to this, so let me click on this link to the next page. I'm waiting, here we go. Declared that the owners of the cafe were allowed to keep cooking bacon despite the complaint of the neighbor, who made a point to highlight his Muslim religion. Owner, who was told to remove an extractor fan because of the smell of frying bacon, Muslims, was celebrating last night after a 6-month legal battle. Akacek and her Turkish Muslim husband, Seaton, won on appeal to keep the fan. Taxpayers will have to foot the legal bill after a council cooked up a fuss following complaints by neighbor Graham Webb Lee. He said Muslim friend refused to visit him because they can't stand the smell of the bacon. He claimed the foul odor was making them feel physically sick, but was unable to produce any such friends to back him up. About 18 months ago, Lib Dem Run, Stockport Council, wrote to the Akaceks, I'm guessing that's how it's pronounced, after Mr. Webb Lee complained. Environmental services officers visited the cafe, but ruled there was no nuisance. Mr. Webb Lee continued to complain. The couple were eventually caught out because they had not applied for planning permission to install the new fan. When they applied retrospectively, they were turned down by the Stockport Area Committee on October the 14th. They launched an appeal, taking their fight to government-run planning inspectorate. It finally quashed the order, Beverly said. It would have cost us a couple grand to move the fan, which we just didn't have source to try that again, which we just didn't have source express. Okay. This is a victory for common sense business law in England, forcing a cafe to close for producing smells, as most cafes tend to. We would have set a strange and unfair precedent for small business owners, Mr. Webb Lee continues to complain, but without any other legal avenue for his frustration to manifest, he'll be forced to cope. So there you have that article. Wow. Man. People have to have something to complain about, don't they? All right. Well, that concludes this episode. And I have at least 2 more episodes this morning that I'm going to bring you. So if you like what we're doing, give it a thumbs up, share it around so people get to hear the news. And don't forget to subscribe. Click on the little bell there on the subscribe button and click the box so that you get the email messages when I put out a show. We'll see you in the next episode.